All right, so it says we're live. Hello, everyone. I'm actually hosting this time, so bear with me.
Oh, we're live. Great. Hey, hey.
um,
We're doing it live.
um, now, no one get triggered by the fact that social justice is in the in the title here.
Yeah, I'm just
Um,
finding the title. This is exciting. Social justice and guilty pleasures. This will be fun. With some Picard facepalm.
um, so yes, for those joining us, my name's Jon Matos. Um, welcome again, Matt, to the show. It feels weird being on this side
Yeah. Yeah.
of the mic
Steering the ship.
because I've done this before. I did this a little while ago with I had a site called Graphically Christian,
Mm-hmm.
and I did a couple reviews, um, or not reviews. I did reviews, interviews, articles, all different types of things. But I talked to a few people. I talked to Jean Luen Yang, who
Oh,
has been
wow.
on
Nice.
Superman for a
Of
little while
course.
now, but
Mm-hmm.
is pretty well known among like in the indie comics,
Definitely.
mid tier indie comics sphere. Um, and Nick, I forget his full name, but I think he has a comic called Sword of Eden, I believe.
Hmm.
Um, Nickerson, I think is his last name. Um, but he is pretty well known for inking Archie comics for a little while.
Oh, cool.
Um, and so that was pretty interesting. Um, but anyway, so I've done interview style things before,
Nice.
um,
Yeah.
but it's never live streaming is still something that like it seems like every time you do it, there's something different that is like required. Um, and so it's interesting to kind of see how the platform is evolving.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
They're trying to make
um,
it easier, but yeah. It's
um,
always a new language you got to learn.
yeah. But anyway, so I believe the reason that I wanted to put social justice is that um, we had been talking about politics in and specifically like we were planning to do something about how when you're writing something you can write like microcosm of a political thing, and it's interesting to me that like and it seems to me that it's very optimistic to think that you can actually discuss these things in an artistic medium. I think it's like a freedom that we have in our country that
Mm.
you don't necessarily have in other places.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it's kind of a blessing that we have, and um, I believe like it's interesting to work this stuff out in proxy
Yeah.
through fiction in a place where you can kind of test out ideas. Um, and so what I think is interesting is that we find ourselves in a place where maybe it's been going on for so long this way that we might see some of like instances where it's so abstract that it no longer really has relevancy to someone's individual lives. Um,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
and so I'm interested to talk about kind of like where we are in terms of like what we think the utility of like um, doing politics in fiction is, and maybe where the little missteps. Personally, I feel like back in like post 9/11 and like during the Iraq War, it was kind of strange to me that there weren't more like politically minded fictional things. It seems to me like
Mm.
compared to now, there were far fewer than there are now. Um, and
Mm.
I'm interested to get your opinion as to what if that's just my like if I had blinders on or if I was just kind of naive or do you what sense do you have of like when you were like coming of age did you feel like things were too political or not political enough, or did you care?
Gosh. Well, um okay, well, I didn't grow up on superhero comics, as you know, so
Hmm.
as far as that goes, I'm not terribly aware. Though I can say, um, things like Watchmen probably broke uh, a perceived barrier of in American comics, at least, where these comics are for kids, so we're gonna kind of fence things off and maybe talk in very general terms, but
Hmm.
not too specifically. Uh, I think Watchmen was the beginning of the end of that, or maybe the end of it, because it's clearly all about fear about the Cold War and nuclear fallout and things of that sort, and
Hmm.
the present political landscape at the time. And I think, but then again, I mean that was very much an outsider. Um, I guess that wasn't terribly main. I feel like it wasn't mainstream.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know. I guess kids. It's tough because there's going to be stories that you can read from the past that, even if they are like, I didn't even know what a Republican versus a Democrat was in high school.
Hmm.
Like I thought I did, and I'd keep getting the terms confused. Like
Uh,
even if things were more political then, and I remember people. You could turn on the news any night and you'd see marches about George Bush being a Nazi and stuff like this. But
mhm.
it didn't feel like um, it didn't feel like a tense cultural situation, probably because I wasn't participating in it as an adult yet. So it was just kind of like, oh, look what those people over there, look what the adult world is doing. I don't get it, and I don't need to get it, I
Hmm.
guess. So I don't know. And it's also tough because like a lot of times you're reading stories from the past, like Fahrenheit 451 or something, and it doesn't have a sense of or you could read Wizard of Oz, for instance, right? Which is
Uh,
all about the uh,
the
getting
gold
the
standard.
yes, exactly, getting the gold standard back, which was intense. I mean, that's as political as you can get. Extremely relevant for 1908 or whatever it was,
Hmm.
and it loses its relevancy quickly, and
Hmm.
then it just becomes a timeless, you know, airy, like hard to decipher treasure of just like nice little fantastical moments one after the other, which I
Hmm.
feel like is what is typically. So yeah, all that to say, I wonder about. I don't know if things are more maybe on social media they are, and there's a need to make things more political because it gets you more attention on social media. But other than that, I'm doubtful that the stories are more political than they are today. I'm a little skeptical. I don't know. Maybe that's just I'm more cynical in general. I don't
Hmm.
I don't give us that much credit that we're the first generation to break the world. But I don't know. What do you think? What's your sense?
Well, it's interesting because I was interested because we my sister and I have been watching Jericho, which was an
Hmm.
interesting kind of sci-fi series that or not, I guess not sci-fi. It's interesting because there's so much world building in it that it feels like kind of like a sci-fi thing. Eventually, when it got canceled, they put out like a series of comics after, like for I guess season 3 and 4.
Hmm.
Um, but anyway, so the one of the major themes in that is the there are these two like young adult, kind of like 20, 20 something guys, and one was like the town like black sheep. Um, he was the son of the mayor, but he was the one that was like getting in. He was like had like gang problems, and um, he would like get drunk and like get in trouble all the time. And then the other one was kind of like the golden child. Well, it starts off with him returning home, and one of the first things that happens is that a nuclear bomb or a series of nuclear bombs hit America, and
Hmm.
so now you have there's this guy that was going to be like running for re-election that all of a sudden is the person that the whole town flocks to. So what's interesting is that I assumed it was going to be a power struggle where like you're like the mayor is your like self-insert dad, and you're like pulling for him to regain power because it's like a power fantasy. Like you want to
Sure.
see the wise character be the one that takes over, like almost like with Picard coming back. Like you want there to be this kind of like
Mm.
sensible, like person that to climb onto. But what's interesting
Mm.
is that that doesn't happen. It's like that the person that the people choose just gets to keep the power, and it's all about the sons and the former mayor just like continuing to be like good and decent and try to like help people survive. So what I thought that was interesting because you having brought up like
Mm.
people's desire for a good king or something, it was interesting that
Mm.
rather than choose the power struggle to be what the main point of the story is, the main point of the story is how can this community survive even though like everything's falling apart around them. Um, and it was very interesting post 9/11 to have it not focus on a the internal power struggle and b an external one, because it turns out the most vicious thing is not the whoever attacked the United States. It's actually like the towns around Jericho that are like that are like struggling to survive. And getting into the second season now, there's a big thing of like the town across from them blames them for like when there were scavengers coming through not warning them
Mm.
sufficiently, and
Hmm.
so they're like about to like start a war with Jericho.
Yeah.
And so it's just a very well done show because it's not being cartoony about like, you know, it's not McCarthy like where like everybody's assuming that like everybody else is terrorist. Um, and it's not like very like, bleeding heart liberal versus tyrannical, conservative person.
Yeah.
Like there was a lot of things that even if it didn't get like very bad, you can kind of remember from the post 9/11 politics. But it was just very much more like traditional, like man is the greatest enemy of himself type stuff, and how can
Mm.
they overcome their basic instinct to try to survive as a community.
Yeah.
So how
I like
highly
that.
recommend.
I really
um,
like that. Yeah. I feel like if you understand the principles of a political issue and you understand both sides of those principles,
mhm,
you can apply that in every circumstance you can write a story about, and that makes it not um, almost not a political comic in the way that people normally mean that term, where it's
mhm,
like just touching on a political topical event and making fun of one side in order to make the other side look like angels, your side, you know.
mhm,
But like it can be extremely political. I mean, I I love politics and stories when it's complex, when it's these difficult issues, these um, uh, challenging issue that people haven't figured out and they never will figure out because they're not. Uh, it's not something that you just have a button on a voting booth to push to fix.
right,
Uh, kind of worked out in a challenging way in a story where you can really kind of see different dimensions of the issue addressed from different people coming from different perspectives. I mean, that's how you tell every story, you know.
right.
Um,
Yeah, because
I hate to say like all life is politics, but in a way, if you define politics as like, you know, individuals and community trying to figure out how to um, interact with and support and live within that community, I guess that's political. Then all stories are political.
yeah, I think that the there's kind of two things that informed me today as I was just going about like watching random things online that kind of helped me think through this discussion a little bit more. And one of them was that they there was a video. Oh, it was a video of Jordan Peterson talking about the universal basic income,
Yeah.
um, and he was talking about how like generally what the conversation has been boiled down to for people that are advocating for that is this idea that if you simply have enough resources that will fix everything.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and what he was kind of trying to say is that you you what we can agree on is that if everyone has nothing and everyone they know has nothing and they feel like the game was rigged against them, then
Yeah.
that's when you start getting problems. And that, like, I think most conservatives would agree that if it gets to that point, there's not really much you can do. Um, so what he
Mm.
was basically saying is that what you really want in any political thing is the ability to know that, okay, maybe it was very difficult for me, but at least my kids have a chance, and like they have
Mm.
more than what I had, and things have improved markedly. And I'm not defining the you know my well-being just by me having had everything that I could possibly want. um,
Mm.
and that generally, like, if you feel like you had a good, like, that there are people that exist that have had it better than you and that have had more chances than you, but at least you had a chance, and you had, like, the game was relatively fair. um, and so what that kind of made me think of was that if you I think the same goes in writing, is that if you make something a very two-dimensional story where this person was well off and this other person is the underdog and they never got any chances, and it's all about them,
Mm.
scraping something together and completely crushing the other person. That's not necessarily a story as much as it is a an angel defeating a demon. Like, you're basically taking, like, your story and trying to mythologize a political struggle as a, like, mythological, like, you're deifying a certain type of person and then you're demonizing another type of person. um,
Mm.
and so I think all of us as writers maybe get to that point where
Yeah.
we realize all writing is conflict, and so you're
Mm.
like, okay, this person has to defeat this other person. But I think we've all experienced stories like some stories that are like Rand, or like Ayn Rand, or like somebody that is completely convinced that not only are they on to something, but they've come up with the final solution, and
Yeah.
everything is this type of person, or this thought, like, experiment, being what everybody needs to know and being very evangelistic about it. um, I think you start getting those stories where, like, okay, e- even if you think this is the solution or this is something very valuable, you need to work it out to where, like, you're giving the absolute best argument for the other side, or you're doing
Mm.
something that makes it seem like believable that there's even a conflict here, because I think you can get to a point where stuff's very cartoony, and that's what I want to get into in the second half. If there's
Yeah.
anything
Sure.
that either of us like that is our guilty pleasure, and that we realize that it's very strident, but we still
Mm.
enjoy imbibing it anyway. Um,
Yeah. Hmm.
but
I have one thing to add. Do you know David Bentley Hart?
not by name, no.
He's a Eastern Orthodox guy and a
Uh,
philosopher and a thinker and a writer, and he's got a particularly uh, I like how, like, he's got a number of things that he says that I think are pretty on point. One being uh, he respects Nietzsche a lot to have the good manners to know exactly what Christianity is, and that um,
oh, mhm. I think I've
civilization,
heard
like,
this before. Yeah.
yeah, you probably, yeah. But he also says that uh, modern secular kind of consumerism culture
Uh huh.
is a function of, or sorry, do I have this wrong? That kind of like a secular atheistic viewpoint is a function of our consumerist culture, I guess.
Oh. Hmm.
Which is a challenging thing to say, but he's arguing that in a culture like ours that values proximate goods more than ultimate goods,
Hmm.
that there really is you're either going to have religion that turns into which is exactly what we've had in America, where you have churches like health and wealth gospel kind of
Oh, right,
stuff,
right.
where it really is a the worship structure, the religion is built to for you to achieve those proximate goods, or you find it outside of the walls of a traditional uh,
Hmm.
religion, and you just kind of get it from Netflix or something.
Hmm.
Which I think that's a pretty damning criticism of our culture, because
So
if
wait,
it doesn't have a price tag, it's not valuable.
I didn't mean to interrupt. So you're saying he was saying that Nietzsche had the good manners to call out basically what would like what Christianity divorced from God would be like, or
Yeah,
what?
I'll read you a. This is a short quote from him. I have it up in front of me, but Nietzsche had the good manners to despise Christianity in large part for what it actually was, above all for its devotion to an ethics of compassion, rather than allow himself the soothing, self-righteous fantasy that Christianity's history had been nothing but an interminable pageant of violence, tyranny, and sexual neurosis. That's pretty bad right there. And
Yeah.
then he goes on. I mean, that's like 90%. he's he's calling everyone out. He may have hated many Christians for their hypocrisy, but he hated Christianity itself, principally on account of its enfeebling solicitude for the weak, the outcast, the infirmed, and the diseased, and because
Mhm.
he was conscious of the historical contingency of all cultural values, he never deluded himself that humanity, this is the biggest part, he never deluded himself that humanity could do away with Christian faith while simply retaining Christian morality, principally caring for the weak and the outcast, the infirm, the diseased.
Mm.
He never deluded himself that you can do away with Christianity and keep Christian morality in some diluted form, such as liberal social conscience or innate human sympathy, some sort of enlightened
Mm.
humanism. He knew that that was never going anywhere. That was going to die as fast as God did.
Mm.
I thought both those are
Well, no,
really
but
good.
that brings me to an interesting point because I'm writing something for the ThinkSpot account where
Yeah.
it's the idea that and it's something I'm also toying around with the White Devil series. For those of you watching, I'm doing a light novel series on tapas called White Devil, where
Mm.
this man and his dog are fighting the monster uh, post-apocalypse. Um, but the I finally came up with what the underlying phenomenon was that brought them to that post-apocalypse. But I knew going into the series what the theme was, and the theme in my mind was how a lot of Americans have flirt with the idea of the transcendence of God and this idea of God
Mm.
being this overlying order, kind of like what for a very long time has been the overriding theology of most Asian cultures, that like heaven is this kind of um, this thing that causes order on earth,
Mm.
and like the most that we can do is to honor our ancestors and honor the the spirit world by making
Mm.
things orderly on earth. But what's interesting is that we've lost kind of a sense of the immanence of God, and
Mm.
we've associated. That's kind of what I had brought up before about what the Heaven book that Randy Alcorn wrote kind of brings to the fore,
Yeah.
is that he was saying that like a lot of Plato's principles have kind of been um, put like have been usurped and absorbed into Christianity, where you have a soul and your soul is trapped in your body, and there's no way that you can really rightfully express all of the goodness that's somehow embedded in you, um, because you're trapped in the material world. Um, but what's so interesting about actual orthodoxy, and that's where you get what all the Inklings were trying to say, is that your imagination is actually a pathway into what like God really has for you. Like you imagine that there
Mm.
should be a better world, and that's actually your like God given blessing and grace to see that there is another path, and that they were trying to. And so what's so interesting about their work is that like the Chronicles of Narnia and Lord of the Rings
Yeah.
and whatever what all of them were working on was to show all of the blessings and good things that are on earth, that show glimpses of what heaven is like. And um I feel like that sense of imminence, you have people on the one side that say like, well, that's polytheism, and that's completely pagan. Or you have like, and C.S. Lewis also wrote about this, that like you have so many people talking about pagans, and then you have post-Christians who, like you're saying, are trying to make like, oh, we can have Christian morals, but we don't need any of that metaphysical nonsense.
Yeah.
Um, and what's so strange to me is that like Christianity is one of the most, to me, rational religions, because from the onset of the biblical writings, you have a God who is invisible, who chooses to incarnate but is not limited to space and time, and writes to us in metaphors, basically admitting to us like there's not any possible way that I could really rationally explain myself to you, but these are things that I've I've basically given you to explain what my goodness is like. And
Mm.
yet, we've kind of lost that sense that this is what these glimpses are really what we're trying to hold on to. Um, and yeah,
Mm.
it's just interesting. And,
Well
and
said.
what that brings me to is that politics seems to me like we want to have some kind of order to things, and there is a portion of that that does reflect our desire for there to be a good leadership, a good example, um, and for the for everyone to be taken care of in a just way. Um, but what's so strange about especially our culture is that in America we're all kings. Like we're all supposedly we have all this power, and
Mm.
so it's a fairly new experiment. And
Mm.
so I think it's appropriate that we're not the best at it. um, but that's why I kind of use social justice as an example. It's because we are strangely we are given more power than ever before to try to make things just by our interactions with each other, and to kind of you know keep things from that chaos of you know the government just being able to throw people in prison because they have you know they're not like, for example, like people can think that the Infowars host is toxic for spreading kind of conspiracy theories,
Mm.
and but it seems like his detractors romanticize the idea of like cops just breaking down his door and throwing him in prison. Like
Yeah.
there's that weird like thing, that balance where like we don't want things to get that bad, but it also like doesn't make us feel very good to see like people just lose their jobs because there's a mob on Twitter that want them to. So
Yeah. Well, that's that imminence, transcendence, and imminence breaking down now into how do we immanentize? How do we make the eschaton now? And it probably, because of our consumerist worldview, it's probably going to either become a social, like that eschaton, that paradise has a price tag, it can be quantified, and it's either going to be a socialist worldview that, I mean, it's not a coincidence that socialism rises immediately downstream of Nietzschean philosophy,
Mhm.
in the same corner of the world at the same time. And it's either socialism or it's some other kind of authoritarianism, whether it's economic or political.
Right.
There are almost two ways of
Well,
saying the same
but the
thing.
case that I was going to make
Yeah.
is that we actually have some kind of um, like I'm under the impression that we have more or less a kind of feudalism that
Hmm.
is like a corporate feudalism where
Hmm.
we like say like somebody, okay, so somebody like Steve Jobs and Wozniak create this amazing product, and they amass all this capital, and
Yeah.
so they create this kind of fiefdom that allows for people underneath them in their employ to prosper, um, and so you
Sure.
have these kind of like things where, because there is the freedom to use the marketplace and kind of create these um, opportunities for people, that becomes what is valued. And there's this idea that those people that are most inventive, that are most willing to try to try something new and innovate, they become kind of surrogate leaders, where and it's one reason why I'm very interested by post-apocalyptic stories like
Yeah.
Blade Runner,
Sure. Yeah.
um, where it's not necessarily like just there is a tyrannical government that destroyed everything, but it's playing around with this idea of like the economy changed drastically. Everyone went to Mars to live, and so now on Earth you have this strange thing where like you know like the skyscrapers are covered in advertisements, and um, there's like basically there's this strange thing of like using like intelligence to um, intelligent beings to try to amass more wealth, and it's it's interesting because at one point I don't necessarily like the Melissa and I discovered that the 70s uh, era of sci-fi and fantasy was called new wave. I don't necessarily
Hmm.
like the idea that like, and so now what we're going to do is basically like we put in this main character, and rather than the story being about that character coming to some kind of like cathartic conclusion or some kind of like ability to you know discover something new, discover some kind of um, inner peace or whatever, most of those stories were about this is how this breaks down this person's like psychology, and like they can't even function anymore. And so it makes
Hmm.
it for a very depressing story, because like it's just like Deckard is broken down by this world that he lives in. um
Yeah.
but at the same time I can't help but see that the when you're trying when you're actually legitimately trying to paint a good picture like that, like the idea of the sheep, like he has a robot sheep in that novel.
Hmm.
Um, there are some like beautiful illustrations like that you can like you almost like break down the chapters into like short stories, and they become these very eloquent pictures of like what in that type of society you're kind of forced into. Like they have that, there's and he's not sure if he has the best electric sheep. Um,
Hmm.
and then you have stuff like they're required to be a part of this like state religion, where you watch this old man climb up a hill, and it's kind of like
Wow.
it's gotten to the
Hmm.
point where like that like a cathartic story like that has gotten to the point where like you it's almost like rather than play a video game, you watch a cutscene, and that is your like religious opiate. And she's like, you watch this thing, and then so it was a very interesting thing because I wasn't sure I was like, is this author trying to critique organized religion, or are they critiquing like you're saying, like a consumer society that has made religion like just another product that you can buy? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway, I'm rambling now, but
No, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. That's it always feels like there's always two sides. I remember the Piss Christ of the 90s, I think it was, or maybe late 80s. Do you
mm.
remember that art installation that everyone was talking about?
Oh, I think, refresh my memory. I don't. I
It was
think I
the
do.
it was a crucifix that seemed to be. I mean, the title alluded that it was submerged in a like a glass vessel of dark urine,
Oh,
and was
okay.
photographed.
Mhm.
And it was at the some like New York gallery, and it got a lot of attention. It's the sort of thing you'd post on Twitter nowadays to get a lot of
Right.
violent, to get trending, I guess.
Mhm.
And there was always two sides in the Christian world to discussing that. There was either this is, I mean, you're just trying to be defamatory to get attention, and then there was people who I think very interestingly, Christians in the New York art scene who were saying, actually, this is a very accurate portrayal of what Christ has done for us. Uh,
Mhm.
you know,
Right. Right. Right.
to be submerged in filth for our. I mean, it's just another way of showing us the cross afresh.
Mm.
And the artists themselves, interestingly, had neither of that. I mean, he had neither view. He had, I think, he was from Spain,
Mhm.
and his view was actually that consumerist. He was doing something a little more nuanced, where he was saying, not necessarily pro-Christian, not anti-Christian, but certainly whatever you think Christianity is, uh,
Mhm.
you've you've done the equivalent of what I'm portraying with your uh, materialist consumerist lifestyle.
Mm.
It's all a farce to you, and I'm just
Mhm.
giving you a mirror. So that
Mm.
was his third dimensional view, which, I mean, that's insanely political. It's insanely interesting to me. I love story like those are the sort of conversations I want to have. Is it blasphemous? Yes. Are we blasphemous? And Christ died on the cross because we're blasphemous, and is that portraying that accurately? Yes.
Mm.
Uh, can you
That's
talk about both at once? Yes. You
one of
know,
my favorite examples like that is because Fahrenheit 451 that you mentioned earlier is one of my favorite novels.
hmm.
I might have repped that earlier because I got my for Christmas I got
Yeah,
a
that's probably what was on my mind. Yeah.
oh um but anyway, so one of my favorite uh like kind of extent or yeah, I don't know if it's an extended metaphor, but anyway, a metaphor in that is that he finds out because they've been burning books for so long that so many people are biblically illiterate that they're starting to put Christ on cereal boxes.
Oh yeah.
And the idea is that because people don't have a reference for who Christ was, that there's just this generic feeling of like if you eat this cereal, then you're holier. Like it somehow imbues you with more of like it's almost like become like a talisman, like Christ's like uh
Hmm.
you know his likeness has become more of like you know I guess like he would be like a Lucky Charms leprechaun on a cereal box. Like there's just
Yeah.
this folkloric feeling to him as opposed to him being a deity or him being a religious figure or anything. And that always hit me very hard, having grown up in the church. That like, what if we got so illiterate that you know people no longer even think of the weird white Jesus that we have like put in churches across the country. They don't even have a reference for him as a person that had meaning. It's just more like,
Hmm.
oh, that's a good kind of like that's like a good luck charm. And I always thought that that was interesting. Um,
Yeah.
and what was the
Sure.
other? There was another thing I was thinking of. The hmm, I might have lost it. Um,
Yeah.
but I was going to ask though, is there something in this kind of second part of the show that you can think of that was like a political like thing that you maybe go, because I go back to reading Fahrenheit 451 every couple years,
Oh,
um,
nice.
and I really felt like Hunger Games was a very especially after like I wasn't that into Harry Potter, I wasn't really into Twilight at all, and
Yeah.
so being on the side of good literature, that wasn't a very good time for me. Um,
Yeah.
but like Hunger Games seemed like it was very accessible, but still very moving, very um, like very nuanced, um, and that's I can understand that like compared to maybe something like Lord of the Flies or like other classic like 1984 Animal Farm, it might not be as
Catch
rigorous or as
22.
yeah,
Yeah.
it might not go down as like one of the classics, but I felt like for what for the age of YA that we were falling into,
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty good, especially especially
Sure.
in how it depicted like there's this love triangle, and so I initially it just feels like okay, this is just because this person is a teenager and they're in this life and death situation, and they have hormones, so like obviously this is something that is just going to happen. Um, but it winds up being
Hmm.
this interesting thing of like the sensitive artist character is trying his best to maintain his dignity, and like he says like I'm not going to be a piece in their game, like
Hmm.
either they can kill me, I don't care, I'm still going to remain a person. But then the person that she grew up with that she respected, who would go hunting with her and she thought was like this very stoic kind of like realist, turns out to be like a war criminal, and
Hmm.
like gets one of her spoiler alert, gets one of her family members killed because he wants to make this political statement. So it was a very interesting way of like making that political point very real, especially
Yeah.
to a young reader, that like this isn't just a love subplot. This is
Hmm.
like, in this type of scenario, she like feels like the person that is like that values human dignity and isn't willing to compromise morally, is the more attractive and like person that she loves more than this other person who just wants to be right and is willing to compromise morally in order to do that. I thought that was a very mature thing for a young adult text.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so is there anything like
Oh gosh.
in the early 2000s that you felt like it was like guilty pleasure, or like that, I guess being an esoteric writer, that you wouldn't maybe expect people to like think that you enjoy or that you like, um,
So
but
we're thinking of coming out in that period.
or you can pick that period. You can think of like, I mean, right now is also very politically charged, so like there might
Yeah.
be something that like you say you enjoy, and people are just like, oh wow, you're my conservative friend. Why would you deign to watch this thing?
So something that's more recent fiction, I guess, right?
Yeah, I said within the
Hmm.
past. Oh dear Lord, it's 2020, isn't it?
Yeah.
Gonna say, I
Yeah.
was gonna say just within the past 10 years, but no, I'm thinking back to even like, you
Yeah.
know, from the 2000s on.
Yeah. Well, I really liked Hunger Games. Honestly, I enjoyed
Oh,
that a lot,
cool.
and I think the weaknesses uh, that Harry Potter did have, or maybe just not weaknesses, but maybe uh, it grew up to a point where trying to grow up with its readership it left people at a point where now they were ready for something that started off in more of a young adult, like, or an actual, I guess, like, like adulty-ish kind of narrative,
Uh-huh.
starting there, like late high school, early 20s, sort of stage in life, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
and and it blended that. I guess we talked about that before, but it blended Harry Potter with of like a kid with a destiny who's gonna fix a broken world meets Twilight with a love triangle.
Mm.
I feel like that did it pretty well. um I mean,
Oh,
honestly,
I
yeah,
just thought of a few more. I didn't
yeah,
realize
please
that I
give me
had a
some more.
couple.
Give
Well,
some more.
okay, so I think this was apolitical in most ways. There were a few things that were very political about it, but the I am a Lost defender. I
Yeah.
did not watch as it was airing, but I think around when the series was ending, I started watching it, and I listened to a basically there was a podcast that was rewatching the show, and so I decided to kind of like keep up with that podcast, and
Hmm.
it was a nice like community experience. Like I got the same experience I
Sure.
probably would have with somebody else watching it, and but there were
Yeah.
a few things like especially like post 9/11. I think it would have been like very controversial that one of the main characters in that show was in the Iraqi Republican Guard.
Yeah, yeah. Or I think it was Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I remember,
and
like, which side were you on? He's like, oh, the revolutionary. Yeah, I remember that.
um,
I only saw a few episodes, and I remember that.
oh, haha.
Yeah.
Um, it like, and I think one thing that I think that kind of falls into guilty pleasure, mostly because of the reaction to the finale. Um,
Yeah.
but the but I think what's interesting, what's fascinating to me about it is that there were a lot of things about there were a lot of things metaphysically and a lot of things with like sci-fi and fantasy that it was basically like building out this world where like whatever was happening on this island was kind of like if this is some kind of I don't think it's spoilery necessarily to talk about it like purgatory. Um, everybody on that show was on some kind of spiritual journey, and
Yeah.
so whatever the revelation at the end of the show was, you got the idea at least by watching show to show that this was like a second chance for everyone on the show. Um, and I usually think of it like rather than lost in the biblical sense being like there are those who are lost and like God's unwilling that any should perish and everyone come to know him. This show is basically making it like what if there was just like specific metaphysical place where everyone gets a second shot
Hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
like it doesn't matter what they've gone through. So you had Saeed, who was that character. You
Yeah.
had a member of the like triads, basically, who, or I don't know what I forget because oh no, because he was Korean, it would have been a different gang. But suffice to say, he was
Yeah.
like some kind of hitman, and he was working for his wife's father, and
Mm-hmm.
then this happened. So he goes from being this very kind of like controlling husband who is very like pathological and like just trying to do what's expected of him
Sure.
to uh like more of like this friendly character. And so it's just a very like I think people of any faith background and any kind of like you know it was also I think that's what makes it kind of a guilty pleasure for me is that it's a
Mm-hmm.
very like um crowd pleasing. And usually, if I'm dealing with something that has to do with religion, like I want it to be very specific about what it's trying to do, because
Yeah.
like it's messing with a lot of people's like worldviews and
I
like
I
if
remember there was a lot of that in Lost, which was kind of neat. I enjoy it. I don't have to see my religious perspective portrayed, but there's a sense of relief. I think it makes people tense when they see real religion really
Uh-huh.
displayed. But for me, I feel like it's relaxing. It's like, oh wow, we're really going to explore something that's in my head and
Mm,
it's in a lot of
right,
people's heads, but we're actually going to talk about it in an
right,
interesting way, through a narrative where I'm going to learn through these characters. Like that's really fun. I like
right.
I liked I didn't actually finish it, but with Jack Ryan. Did you see some of that? I think it's like the
Oh,
Hulu or
you mean um
yeah,
the new okay, yeah. Yes,
yeah.
I watched the first season. I've seen a few episodes of the newer season.
Uh-huh.
But haven't I think I think I watched the first 3 episodes of the second season.
Yeah.
Um
Okay. Well, you probably know like 8 episodes more than I do, but I like seeing real people really uh engaging with a real with a real religion. It doesn't have to
oh,
be mine, but just that it's a real religion. Like
true.
that's nice. I'm like, okay, that's a dimensional view that and again, like it's always frustrating. Like I watched episode 1 of Messiah, like I told you about,
Oh, sure,
and
sure.
religion of any persuasion now, it's at the point where the only safe way is to portray a bunch of sterilized, pale white people um, calmly monitoring the religious world from their laptops, which is
It's very
brown
true.
and not anywhere near, and it's usually they're trying to find some way to discuss Islam, and they very interestingly and cleverly found a way to do it by talking about Isa, Jesus, through Islam. And it's always permissible to talk about Christianity. So if you make it Jesus coming back, but you do it from an Arabic context, you can kind of discuss two religions at once, which I thought was pretty interesting. I think it's a clever way to do it. You get
Oh,
a twofer.
you know what I forgot though? I was just
Yeah.
remembering that my family was big into Law and Order back in like the late 90s,
Oh, neat.
early 2000s stuff,
Yeah.
and like all the different variations of it. But I just remembered how for a little while there on that show, and like I know there was a lot of big Stephen King adaptations in the 90s and early 2000s. There was
Yeah.
this kind of like that. I think is the only thing I remember seeing as like a very toxic political thing, was that there was a very
I,
common like stereotype of like, this is the crazy, I'm gonna blow up an abortion center
oh
Christian,
yeah.
or like
Yeah.
there was that. I remember that caricature, and I remember multiple Law and Orders and multiple Stephen King things where that was a like I remember just like in a lot of Stephen King adaptations, that is the only way that you're going to see a Christian in his worldview.
Yeah.
And in Law and Order, I remember it was like it was just funny because I didn't remember at the time. At the time I just thought it was a TV thing because I was in middle school and high school, and
Yeah.
I had my own kind of like hormonal thing going on. But then
Sure.
when I remember there being a marathon of Law and Order, and just sitting there, I think I was doing something else, but then I realized how many episodes were like torn from the headlines, anti like Patriot Act things, and it
Oh
made me
sure.
think about it. And I'm just like, oh, all of these are about random like rights abuses, and like it just showed me what the political leaning of Dick Wolf and that whole like like every single show was a political statement. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it just kind of struck me all at once that like, oh, that was on purpose. It wasn't my imagination that every like person of faith in this show like, and that was what was funny, was that I think it wasn't just Christian. I think there was also like, post 9/11, there were a lot of, basically every time they would talk about Islam, it would just be a like a potential terrorist scare or whatever.
Oh,
Anyway,
interesting. Yeah.
um, but
Yeah.
no, I'm just trying to remember. There was another guilty pleasure that I had. Um, that was Lost, and um, well, I guess. I guess right now there's kind of this era of I'm fascinated by the like YA as a genre
Sure.
and how odd it is that like you have like the CW show that used to just be like teen soap opera stuff. Now it seems like the teen soap like I it's always interesting to me when you start getting into like is this a genre or a medium? Because
Hmm.
when you start treating like YA as like we can do multiple types of stories through this, it almost becomes a medium because you have like a language that you can
Hmm.
translate. So now
Yeah.
you have like there's the superhero YA show, and so you have a bunch of people trying to make the new Smallville, the new Arrow or Flash type thing. Now you have all these things like Black Lightning and like all those types of shows. Then you have like Riverdale, which is like the kind of um, seedy like YA show where um, it's like suburban life, but everybody has like a secret type of thing,
Yeah. Hmm.
and that's
Hmm.
becoming its own thing. So I feel
Yeah.
like I find myself watching like reviews of that type of show because I'm endlessly fascinated as to what like having been someone that wrote a book about like coming of age.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me like all the different kind of fandoms that are popping up around like do they like are the kids self-aware that this is not what it's like to be a teenager and like it's fun for them to like mock like how dramatic like everyone's being and stuff like that, or do they really
Hmm.
think like oh like I want to be like Dark Betty from Riverdale and like
Hmm.
is that an aspirational thing, like is there something glamorous about like these types of things?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. Oh man, I had something and then I lost it. But it is interesting. Oh yeah, yeah. I never grew up watching any kind of real crime stuff
Mm.
or um, or fake crime or like murder mystery stuff. But my wife grew up with a lot of murder mystery stuff,
Oh,
and
uh,
she got me into it. And now it's my favorite short form story genre,
mm,
hands down, because I've seen enough of it now to understand. Uh, it's kind of become a medium for a lot of different things now in my head. You know, it's a genre, but you can actually use it. Um, it doesn't have to be a genre. You can use it as a vehicle to talk about justice and injustice,
mm,
uh, and uh, perceived, oftentimes social ills, and how
mm,
you know the complexities of human action and what what's your fault and what's society's, uh, and how do we fix that collectively as a community? Do we elect leaders who will keep us safe but remove freedoms from us in
mm,
order to keep the bad people on the outside from coming in and stealing our stuff? Like
mm,
those kind of tried and true kind of issues of like how do we keep chaos at bay?
mhm.
We might need a protector, you know, whether
Right.
that's the um, private investigator or the police or
Mm.
some kind
No,
of
I very much that very much resonates with me because
yeah.
I used I'm at an interesting crossroads with the Seven Deadly Sins series as I'm
Hmm.
writing it because I wrote Cain and Abel was like a coming of age story that it's supposed to shock you how it changes as he grows up. It's basically what it was my tribute to like American Psycho and those types of stories in the '90s where
Sure.
the whole idea is that it's um like you're supposed to hate the main character and try to figure out why they are the way that they are and why they took the turn that they did. Um, and but then in writing the second novel, Childish Things, um, I started to realize that it's very difficult to live in that type of like. It would be very odd to me to try to write every single novel and have that be the point of like, like I would be putting
Mm.
myself in a Shyamalan type of like typecasting if every single entry was a different kind of like, there's supposed to be a twist basically. Um, but what I found is that the Childish Things is much more like um, a John Grisham novel. I don't know if you've seen any of the adaptations of his, uh, works. Um, but
I just know him as a guy who writes a lot, but
oh,
I haven't actually read him.
that I think that was another big because my sister especially likes John Grisham stuff because
Mm.
she showed me one of his recently that was The Client. I believe that was like a late '90s adaptation of his. Um,
Hmm.
there's The Rainmaker. There's a couple, but it seems like he was on this thing of like all of his works are they're some kind of legal thriller, but they take like you're saying some kind of social ill, and they show that through the justice system, right? Um, and
Mm.
I'm considering maybe going forward that maybe like I self published Cain and Abel, maybe Childish Things rather than just being the name of the second book in that series, it can be like Childish Things is the series name, and each
Mm.
one of the things is a kind of quasi legal thriller that deals with a different like. So, because I have already
Yeah.
had this idea that my third novel is going to be about um, alien abduction, and
Yeah. Neat.
so I was thinking like, what if all of the entries are about some kind of like ambition that or some kind of obsession that the character comes across, and like they all have their like coming of age is basically the thing that is in common with um all the entries of the series, but they all kind of latch on to like in like Catcher in the Rye. There's some kind of thing that they can't get past that's preventing them from coming of age. Like
Mm.
there's some
Hmm.
kind of obsession that they have, and
Yeah.
it just struck me as like if all of them are like a John Grisham novel where there is some kind of like the catharsis comes from, whatever this society, whatever this like system declares as justice is
Hmm.
what is the metaphor for how that person
I
uh
like that a lot. Yeah.
um yeah. And so anyway, all that to say that the um uh I was just remembering that Shyamalan was actually another thing that was a guilty pleasure growing up
Oh,
because
sure.
he
Yeah.
is from uh, he grew up I think in India. His childhood was in India, but then he came
Yeah.
to Philadelphia very early on, and it's where he films a lot of his. I don't know how many people outside of Philadelphia know this, but he films a lot in Pennsylvania. Um, and so there's this kind of feeling of like he's a hot mess, but he's our hot mess, and
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it seems like
Kind of
a
rooting
lot of
for him.
yeah. So there's that thing, but then also like as somebody that loves this idea of like the modern Gothic, like a lot of his works are about they're in that kind of psychological thriller base that I really love,
Yeah.
and it's interesting that rather than typecast himself as like a specific like if he had just like worked with Bruce Willis on Sixth Sense and was just like, okay, you're Bruce Willis, I'm just gonna do a bunch of Bruce Willis action movies or something like. There's a lot of
Hmm.
directors that typecast themselves that way.
Yeah.
He's more of like, I'm just gonna do a bunch of weird, like, uh, very kind of, uh, cerebral thrillers where there's some kind of like satire or there's some kind of point, some kind of message each with each one.
Hmm.
And even though, like, objectively, I can say that, he has a very specific type of style, and, they might, like, for example, my English teacher in middle school said that after watching The Village, she couldn't stop thinking of Scooby Doo, and, like, it just made it just made the whole movie very farcical to her.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
but I very much liked that idea of like these aren't like these are very adult. These are very like thought like they're very thoughtful movies. Um, and I feel like he does a lot of good like idiosyncratic character work where like I really believe that the people in his films are you know real. Um,
Oh yeah,
and
that's the best part of his plots. I think he thinks he's good at writing plots, but what he really is good at is character.
mm,
Really good at character,
that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
noticing and uh, I don't know, like in casting and picking the right moments to highlight
Mm,
and getting the right performances out of people. It seems like he really knows how to. He loves character, and he's
mm,
willing to do anything to embellish that, which is
right. Yeah, because
he's
I
one of
mean
the best.
I feel like him and like doing the romance in the village is to me one of the best kind of like
Hmm.
especially like trying to portray like what romance would be like in an Amish kind of like community.
Yeah.
This idea of like there's this blind girl and there's this guy that always looks out for her and he'll never say anything like to her specifically, but then she has that long monologue where she's like, I know how you feel about me and I'm sick of you not saying anything to me
Yeah.
about it. And then he like all of his like inhibitions finally like break down and he's like
Yeah.
so angry, but you can see how much of that passion is like just repression that he's finally like letting go of.
Hmm.
And that's a
Hmm.
very beautiful scene, and it's interesting because of how seemingly like people kind of talk about like his style is very like you can kind of tell from how he films that he might have had a lot of repression or like he comes from a very kind of cloistered
Hmm.
community because of how like kind of low key everything is. It's not very like bombastic.
Yeah.
Maybe until you get to like stuff like Glass, like you just made. Um,
Hmm.
but like they kind of make fun of like his the people don't really talk like people. Um,
Yeah.
but at the same time, like that you can there is at least like such attention to like detail and how um, like different types of social like contracts that people have um like in signs like this idea that like if aliens would come like how a child would perceive that and how like how kind of zany things would get and like
Yeah.
they're tonally like it seems like he's much more consistent than people kind of give him credit for.
Oh yeah. 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 I mean that is the consistent thread. I think is finding those little people moments
Mhm.
of peculiarity and curiosity. I guess like the eccentricities of like everyday human life that make people interesting and worth framing. I guess that's his best. That's where he shines, even in his bad movies, of which he has made some.
Yeah, yeah, no, I will concede that. It's so funny, like as a defender of him, hearing him talk about the happening and like
Oh yeah.
what he was like trying to do. Because I'm under the impression that like he did want it to be funny, that it wasn't necessarily like
Oh
he thought it was supposed to be necessarily like 100%. Because like and the reason why I kind of trust that instinct is that when you watch the visit, which was kind of like his return more to like form, um there are parts in that that do come across as intentionally funny, and that like that's what people were kind of shocked by. They were like, "I this is funny, and it's weird to see somebody that does such like earnest filmmaking do something that's like
Mhm.
a traditional like black comedic thing." Because you have like all this
Yeah.
jokes about like what if your grandma and grandpa were like going crazy and
Yeah.
like you're like a middle school student and you have to live with your there's this idea of like being afraid of old age and like that everybody can relate to. um so that
Yeah.
that was an interesting thing. and it made me kind of feel like he was trying to experiment more with humor with like that and the Lady in the Water and things like that.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
but it
yeah,
didn't necessarily like connect in the way that he might have wanted.
yeah, yeah. He struggles like liking character development as much as he does in every aspect of those little moments. Like he likes humor too, but uh, he, humor is probably the hardest thing to pull off.
Mm,
You know,
right.
so it's yeah.
No,
I
I mean,
haven't honestly. I haven't. I used to watch a lot of his, and then I kind of dropped off. So I haven't seen like the last maybe 4 movies. I'm kind of a humbug. I'm sorry,
no,
but
that's
I do like him a lot.
you're giving him more credit than most people that I talk to. So
Oh,
I appreciate that.
I think he's turned things around. He's made enough content that people have liked, where he's no longer. I mean, he used to be able to almost, if you wanted to, you could draw like just a timeline chart of his best movies and then descending in order uh, of
Mm,
release. How good they were.
right, right.
You could almost feel that way, but that hasn't been the case for years now. So
Mm.
um,
I'm trying to remember. So I really liked The Visit was cool,
yeah,
and um
it looked neat.
and then Split and Glass. I liked Split more than Glass, but
Yeah.
um I think both were very entertaining. Um, and like Glass was just interesting because it was much more of like a. It seemed like he was willing to take advantage of the superhero film being the way that it is now,
Mm.
because it was interesting that, I mean, have you heard what the twist and split was and how it led to Glass?
No.
Okay, well, this is just fun to
Yeah,
reveal
please.
to you because it was an interesting, as a fan, it was very fulfilling in a strange way. So there was did you see the film Unbreakable?
Yeah, I saw that at least. Yeah.
Okay, so um, Split was sold as this is James McAvoy as like a slasher bad guy, and he kidnaps these 3 girls, and it's filmed mostly in like this um, abandoned. We don't really know where it is, like some kind of sub basement or something. And in Split, he has multiple personality disorder, um, and there is one personality that he keeps warning about the Beast, and the main character eventually escapes with her life, um, but he like you get the idea that like this this one personality that he's had, and what Shyamalan kind of used to make this more of like a supernatural film was
Mm.
that like there are certain people with dissociative identity disorder who like their physiology will change slightly if
Mm.
they're one like expressing one of their um, perceived personalities. And he there was one when he turned into the Beast, quote unquote, he got
Mm.
more muscular, and um, like he was able to like scale walls and things like that.
Mm.
um, so at the end of the film, when she's escaped, you find out that he was in like this abandoned part of the Philadelphia Zoo, and that many of the personalities were based on different animals. Um, but like
Oh, interesting.
there was a post credit scene where like you're seeing all of the news footage, and it zooms out, and the superhero Bruce Willis's character from Unbreakable sees that news footage, and so the implication obviously being, oh wow, this is in the same universe as Unbreakable, and
Yeah.
basically this David Dunn's character might pursue the Beast as like a arch villain, or some kind of bad guy that he wants to bring to justice.
Yeah.
So then the premise of Glass was that the Beast finds Samuel L. Jackson's character in the same, like they get him, like David Dunn, Mr. Glass, and um, the character from Split, all are brought to the same facility, and they're being studied as like test cases for this like superhero syndrome. Um, Now, what I think you would find interesting is that this is kind of like what I was talking about that J. Michael Straczynski was kind of bringing up with the whole like, did the spider bite you or are you delusional thing,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
they're kind of basically saying like, you're basically trying to mimic all of this metaphysical nonsense from, an esoteric time, and you just need to have been hugged more by your mommy and daddy. But what ends up being like the rub is that um, these are really um, legends, and they're trying to kind of like it's basically M. Night Shyamalan's culmination of this series by um, showing like through this. I called it Quixotic horror. It's kind of
Hmm.
like if
Okay.
if if your delusion is that you are totally you know um that you are a godlike being, and but it just turns out that you're evil. Like, what does that mean to you? um
Hmm. Hmm.
and so it was an interesting thing to have that be like what the twist was at the end of Unbreakable, that like, you know great if there's a hero that thinks that he's you know capable of changing the world, but there's also people that are completely tyrannical that also believe that they should be able to change the world into their image. Um, so it was an interesting.
Yeah.
It made it a very interesting like series to go from Unbreakable to Split, where that seemingly the theme of that was your weaknesses turn out to make you stronger. Um, and
Yeah.
it was interesting. The main character of that was abused by her uncle, and that turns
Hmm.
out to be what makes the beast spare her. That like you've already been through the crucible, so you get to survive because he could identify with her,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
that's how he developed his disorder, was he was abused as a child. Um, and then Glass, like it's kind of this culmination of all of these themes, um, and trying to basically like it. That's one of the reasons why I like kind of like Split more, is that like he just kind of doubled down on the themes from the first two, and it became much more a little bit more strident than the other two had been. Um, but it was still like, because he's like, I don't know if you've seen pictures of Gritty, the Flyers mascot. Like, he's another kind of monstrosity that us Philadelphians like don't want anybody else to make fun of, but we kind of have that, we reserve that right. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
I kind of feel that way about him, that like there are so many things that I love about him as a creator. So when I notice something that I don't like, it's that much more disappointing. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, but I would recommend that series just because, as somebody who likes comics, and especially kind of like the esoteric roots of like mythology and things like that, I think you'd really dig that series, Unbreakable, Split, and Glass. Um,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I just thought, as an outsider looking in, I was like, there was nothing interesting about um, everything that was interesting about Unbreakable, of which there was a lot, um, had nothing at all to do with superheroes.
oh,
And that
true.
reveal was intensely, that's like, the reveal to me felt like, so there's a superhero with strength. Well, who can be his opposite? How about a weak villain? That sounds like the most it sounds like it's been developed really well throughout the other two books, but I feel like that's the most small brain ending you can give. Like, well, okay, so the guy's intelligent but weak. That's not. I don't know. I don't know.
Right. I
I'm
I
sure
think,
it's
but
deeper, but
that's the same. Like, I'm I'm with you in that sense that like
Yeah.
that's that's one of those things that I feel like is his strength and weakness is that
Mm.
like he's he's pretentious enough that
Yeah.
like he's willing to
Very.
dive into these different things like with the village like there's this society that is cloistered and like he took so many pains to make it seem like you know like you have yellow is the good color and red is the bad color and like there are all these things that are very like good on the face of them to like illustrate this point that he's trying like
Hmm.
to portray this thing.
Yeah.
um, but then when you get to what the reveal is, and you think of, like, you're kind of writing this modern allegory. There's so much in your right brain that wants to be like, well, that can't work. Like there are certain things that that are just maybe distracting from the main kind of like allegory of it, and
Yeah.
some of his things more than others are like I can't, and especially like I think
Yeah. Like
the
Lady in the
happening,
Water was one.
yeah, and like the
Yeah.
happening to me is like I'll watch Lady in the Water, but I can't watch the happening because of how monotonous kind of like
Yeah.
the it is, and I think more of the like to me like I really love the kind of cognitive dissonance or like um the kind of strangeness of scenes like in Unbreakable when his son is like, I want you to be a hero so bad that I'm gonna shoot you. And like this idea of
Mm.
like they're just uh friends don't shoot friends, and like the husband and wife are kind of like acting in this weird kind of uh like trying to be rational about a situation where any other parent would just kind of be like give me that like you know like there's some of it that becomes like very cartoonish, but it is like as from like I would love to just be in a room with him and like write a script together and come up with some of these ideas
Sure.
because it's so interesting to have somebody that's obviously like very willing to kind of like the Lost Writers. Like he's incorporating all these ideas that, like in the village, like there is nothing specifically Christian about that society, um, but
Yeah.
it's very obvious that like he's
He's thinking.
satirizing
Yeah.
a specific type of Christianity, maybe a specific type of Hinduism, because he talked about like, there were stories that they would tell him back in India, like, if this spirit, you know, wants you to, you know, wash your teeth before you go to bed, like, there's multiple societies that have that type of thing.
Yeah.
So it's like you said, like, there's this comfort watching that movie of like, oh, this is a religious society. He's not afraid to go there with this.
But yeah, but to me, when I see a fictional religious society, that's when I tense up. I think other people find that
Oh,
that to be a release because they find that like it's a safe way to talk about real realities
uh-huh.
by making fun of reality through or critiquing reality through a fictionalized view. But I find that to be so high. I don't know. It has the appearance of getting into deep stuff without actually taking any risks whatsoever, and I find that really cowardly in a way. I want to see real religions. We all
Huh.
know what real religions are. We're talking about them a lot. Uh,
Right,
why don't you just show them and
right,
tell me interesting stories within that?
right.
That would be a challenging story, and that would be a story worth sitting through and seeing
So
achieve
going back to
successfully.
Messiah, because I feel like
Yeah,
that is what impresses me about it. That rather than it being like lowercase I Islam, lowercase c Christianity, there's this idea of like, no, like the main theme of this thing is these people's faith and
yeah,
what they're doing to interpret that. So how did, because I've watched the whole first season.
Oh,
Um,
neat! Wow,
I can give thoughts on it.
I've seen one
Like
episode,
in
so
Oh, okay. I can give
I don't
abstract
watch a
thoughts.
lot of TV, so it's
Oh no, that's
tough.
no need to apologize. But like, did it feel like okay, this is actually getting into, this is not like a secularized thing like what, because you were complaining about like, there's that weird thing of like we can examine via a third person different religious things. Do you feel like that tainted the topic, or do you think that it actually like did go places where you were like, oh, they actually go in there?
Well, no, because I'm interested because I have a hobby called Islam.
Uh-huh.
um, I like to I can tell that they're portraying. I know enough about it to know that they're actually trying to portray the historical traditional view of who Isa is, Jesus,
Right.
and in his second coming kind of situation. But they're trying to do it. They're trying to talk about Jesus through, but at the same time, they're giving it an Arabic, Islamic veneer so that we can feel sufficiently maybe alienated by it, I guess, which is weird but challenging. And to maybe put us in the position of like reading the Gospels or something where we're like uh, a Roman establishment elite kind of peering over into what are these Israelites doing?
Mm.
Uh, who are
Well,
these people walking around in the
I
wilderness?
th- I think that's an interesting way of putting it. That like and I feel like it would be a nice topic for another time. That like
Yeah.
there's a strange way of, if you're going to do religion in a postmodern world, or a
Mm,
post-Christian world, I guess I should put it, that
mm,
like you almost have to do something to exoticize it in
yeah,
order to make it
you do.
palatable. And
You do
um,
because a lot of people are aware that the people who we're thinking about who are religious are not in the West for the most part. We might talk about religious Westerners, but it's because we have permission, cultural permission to, because they're not actually um, terribly threatening. I think, in a way, I don't know. Maybe that's increased. Maybe that's becoming less so. Maybe people post 2016 are feeling more anxious about Christians in the West or
mm,
religious people in the
well,
West.
I
But
think we should get into maybe some personal, like, because
yeah,
in Philadelphia, what's interesting is that like there's, in on the one sense, a lot of freedom in terms of like for example, I go to a poetry reading, and like I've done things where like Jesus is a character in a short story I've written, and
huh.
like I've been able to talk about that, and like, or like I did a story about an abusive priest and things like that, and
Yeah,
it's not like anybody's come to me specifically to say, oh, this triggered me, or I don't like this or that about your story,
yeah,
but but I feel like there's also this kind of thing of like, you're, if you do go there and you're earnest about it, you might just be ostracized by ambivalence, because like
yeah,
people are just like, okay, so you're one of those people that is a biblical literalist, so that's kind of like anathema to the actual arts. Um,
yeah,
and I
yeah.
think it's just an interest. Like, I don't know what it's like outside of a major like metropolitan thing where like
Hmm.
there might be a Philly scene of the arts, but I doubt that that's what it's like if you go to, say, like a Starbucks open mic night in Tennessee, or
Yeah,
Florida where you are. Um,
yeah. I imagine it
uh,
would be pretty different. Yeah.
and like you're going to a art show this summer. Um, does it seem to you like there is a specific like scene that you're basically like thinking of, like, okay, this is what these people will understand and respond to, or do you feel like you can go there with KYRIE stuff and feel like people will get what you're trying to do, or I don't
I
know if
think it's
you're imagining that yet.
I think it's pretty open. The the showrunner for the event uh, attends the church that I used to go to, and
Oh, yeah.
it's not a Christian event, but um, it's Christians as well. I haven't actually looked closely into it in a number of years, but I know it was started by Christians who were thinking about how do we engage and interact with and share community with the arts scene in general. And
Mm,
it was not, the charter was not to be a Christian arts collective, but just to uh, be just be involved in it more.
mm.
So I'm assuming because that's still been the plan,
Oh,
and so I don't feel it'll be difficult to bring religion up, but I don't even know. I don't know with Kyrie, like if I had book four, it's like a story. You don't have a story. You just have a series of events until you have a conclusion.
mm.
Then you have a story, and because that's going to help frame what the whole story was for.
Okay.
And I feel at least that's my simplistic view. And if I had the end of the story in front of people, maybe I'd want to go into more deep thematic stuff. But
Mm. Well, I think it's an interesting way to wrap up the
yeah,
political conversation. At least that, like,
yeah,
I felt like at one time the idea was, you had, like, as far as the United States goes, you had a lot of liberal arts, like, institutions that were, founded under this idea of, that we have all this religious freedom, and we have this way of being able to, like, make things so that everyone can, pursue happiness the way that they want to. And
mm,
then eventually that started to secularize to the point of, yeah, you can talk about whatever you want, but you shouldn't feel like your political or religious opinions are, you know, like, there started to be these echo chambers, and
oh sure,
I feel like recently, and oh, that was the other thing I was going to bring up, that um, I was watching the Joe Rogan Experience, and Neil
yeah,
deGrasse Tyson was on, and he was saying back in the 50s and 60s there was this idea that um, the energy was going to be what eventually got democratized. So, you would get a flying car and you would be able to travel as much as you wanted, and um, you know, like Tesla's whole idea was that you could grab electricity from the air and power your things and go your merry way. But
yeah,
what's interesting is that what actually got democratized, because we figured out radio waves and satellite communication things,
yeah,
is information. And
mhm,
what makes that so interesting is that now everybody has, like, and then politically, I think what that's doing is, even if you don't feel like you have a pathway to a, like, traditional, like, manual labor job, a lot of
mm,
that stuff is disappearing.
yeah,
There is at least this zeitgeist of, holy crap, like, if I wanted to today, I could start my own TV channel, or, like, I get, like, all these different types of entertainment right to my, living room. And so I feel like there's so much of that, um, like,
mm,
information right at your fingertips, and, like, as far as education, that makes things so much easier as well. Um, that there, it's a lot less, like, it's a lot less dystopian than you would, like, than entertainment would have you to believe.
mhm,
While at the same time, because we have so much access to information, we're actually able to converse and have that dialogue be something that is very consistent.
Hmm.
And so personally, I'm very optimistic that like because we have this much like ability to um, converse, like a lot of the myths are very easy to dispel
Yeah.
now. It's just the work of getting people out of some of those echo chambers that they might still be in,
Yeah.
and helping people to see that like, hey, this isn't, I don't want to, take your cattle. I want there to be um,
Hmm.
the same
Well said.
opportunity for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what people are principally worried about is they're trying to work extra hard to get more protection in an increasingly democratized world. Democracy, is like, and we can end here. Like, democracies usually become tyrannical
Right.
if they have a strong constitutional republic foundation that can be held off. But
Right.
when power is given to the people, the Greeks typically hated democracy. It was usually made fun of,
Oh, right, right, right.
and uh, and in most periods throughout human history, democracies have been a source of some pretty bad things. Just like in a free, like just giving the people I guess giving the majority the power to rule over the minority
Mhm.
is is what a pure democracy becomes. And I think people are worried about that in this increasingly decentralized information age. But
Mm.
if we have kind of a constitutional culture of sorts that wants some principles on the table that's going to be guaranteed for the majority as well as the minority equally, we can have the like a shared public forum space that actually encourages people to feel safe disagreeing again. You know what I mean? Without
Mhm.
worrying about the majority stealing cattle from the weak. I guess
Right. Yeah, I think we did a lot of good work here talking about like
Yeah.
the different, interesting like how fiction allows you to basically do little bits like little thought experiments,
Hmm.
and you might not even be convinced yet of your, like, you might go into it with a specific worldview, and then once you're done the work, you're like, oh, I'm completely over here now. Or
Hmm.
it might just be an exercise of like proving what you were already kind of thought was true. And then when you release it, that's when you start getting feedback of like, well, I didn't like this, or this or that. Um,
Yeah. Hmm.
but it is, as we close,
Hmm.
it is it is. I think it'll be interesting to talk about going forward, like different maybe freedoms and different
Yeah.
like things that we are interested in getting into through the power of storytelling.
That sounds really nice. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess we'll pick that up for next episode. That would be
Yes.
nice.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, thank you guys for joining us. Those that popped, I saw a couple people pop in and
Hmm.
out. Um, and obviously, all those of you watching the VOD um, can enjoy this whenever is most convenient for you. Um, but you can find my stuff on Amazon as Jonathan Matos. So if you want to look at my offerings, they're there. Um, and you're taking pre-orders for uh, the second installment of KYRIE, right?
Yeah. Just well, not pre-orders yet, but just email sign up list
Oh,
sort of
haha,
thing.
yes.
So just so I can let all those people know at once, so we can have a good first day whenever that does happen.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
I was struck a little bit by like, wow, he's like already taking pre. But yeah, it is the pre-production for the pre-order.
Yeah, it's definitely pre-order phase.
Good. Good.
Yeah,
All right. Well,
everything
thanks
in due
again
course. Yep.
for joining us, and we'll talk to you guys later.
See you guys.
Peace.